Hello there. Welcome back to another What If in the What If series. This time we're going to look at what would happen if a Klingon Vor'Cha class attack cruiser was the one spirited away to the Delta Quadrant. Before we get started, I just want to say a little bit of an appreciation. Thank you to everyone that's actually engaged with, liked videos, shared these videos recently, and for people that have helped in other ways, as I have had some issues recently, like I've had to change jobs, which has been extremely unpleasant to have to do, and being temporarily unemployed for a while. And for those of you that have helped with that, that's been very much appreciated. Thank you. Now getting to the hypothetical. We're going to go with a Klingon Vor'Cha class attack cruiser getting stranded in the Delta Quadrant. Now, there is one obvious thing we should say about Klingons. They have a reputation for being a race of warriors, a race of brutes, unthinking, uncivilized, uncouth savages. It's a very undeserved reputation. It completely undermines and belittles the subtleties of Klingon society and culture. Klingons are a highly intelligent, deeply spiritual people. Yes, they are warriors. Yes, their tendency to default to violence over diplomacy is definitely a thing, but that does not mean that Klingons are incapable of it. All the way from the original series, from Kirk's day to the modern age, Klingons have been shown to be just as duplicitous as Romulans when they want to be, as peaceful and open to negotiation as the Federation can be, but also be as vicious and brutal as any Klingon has a reputation to be. They're a nuanced and diverse people with a very high tolerance in many ways. Klingons view other races a lot of the times as, like, they refer to humans as a patak. See them as weaker than them, not as strong as them, not as powerful as them. They see peacemaking and negotiation perhaps as a weakness sometimes over being a strength. But there are many Klingons that also appreciate the subtleties and strengths that these things provide for your society. Not everyone can be a warrior. Many Klingons pursue a very different lifestyle. Honor can be gained through other means. So, with all that out of the way, what would happen if a Klingon attack cruiser actually ended up? Now, we have to assume this vessel probably wasn't taken from the Badlands, but it doesn't really matter where it was taken from. It's highly unlikely a Klingon Vor'Cha class vessel would be able to maneuver in the Badlands. For a quick overview of what a Vor'Cha class is, if you're not familiar with it, it's the Klingon premier vessel of the mid to sort of towards the end of the 24th century, until eventually being superseded by the Nekvars. The Vor'Cha was such a preeminent vessel that even Chancellor Kimpek used one as his flagship, and for a brief time so did Gowron, again until it was eventually replaced by the Negvar. But the Vor'Cha was a highly capable ship, roughly comparable to a Federation Galaxy class in most areas, including in living conditions aboard the ship, as they were notably more comfortable than a standard Klingon vessel. These ships also defaulted to being the Klingon version of a diplomatic ship on many occasions. They are equipped with a standard cloaking device, as is usual for Klingons, defended by shields. They are armed with photon torpedoes, disruptor cannons, as well as auxiliary disruptor arrays as well. These are very heavily armed ships. They follow the traditional Klingon hull profile of having a drive section, a sort of command section at the front with a long, thinner neck, which has been reinforced in its design rather than being as spindly as it was on the older battle cruisers, out to the rear drive section, which has a nacelle pylon sticking out either side of it. It should be noted that the bridge is actually on a raised section on the ship along the neck. They are extremely capable starships, and they were ubiquitous in the Klingon Empire, fighting in the short-lived conflict with the Federation, their conflict with the Cardassians, and notably their conflict with the Dominion. These ships got everywhere and were highly effective combat vessels, both on their own and as part of a group. No matter what the enemy, this ship was able to rise to the occasion, but also again served as a perfect diplomatic platform due to its, again, utility and versatility, which was a bit unusual for Klingon ships. So with that said, what would happen if it ended up in the Delta Quadrant? Well, obviously it arrives at the Caretaker. The Klingons' initial reaction is going to be one. They're going to default to their true nature, their perfect basic nature. They're going to try and argue with the Caretaker. They're going to put up a bit of a fight. But unlike some others who might, say Cardassians, who might not investigate it, the Klingons, when they realize they can't take the array by force, they're going to do exactly what Voyager did. They're going to track down those pulses. They're probably going to even run into Neelix. They might even trust Neelix to help them with the Ocampa and dealing with the Kazon. But when they encounter the Kazon, the Klingons would very likely get into a fight with them. They wouldn't have the same tolerance to the Kazon's BS as Starfleet did. It would have resulted in an armed fight. They may also have quickly turned on Neelix when they realized that he was basically using them to save Kes. I highly doubt they would have kept Neelix and Kes aboard ship. Whether or not they would have killed him, I'm not sure. They might have understood how honor would be served from Neelix's point of view, for lack of a better word, for saving his beloved, his partner, his Parmakai. So they might have let him go over that, but they probably would not have kept him aboard unless they really saw the advantage. But I also can't see Neelix wanting to stay amongst the Klingons, so more than likely him and Kes would leave. This would continue the escalation of conflict with the Kazon. The Caretaker would set his self-destruct, and while the Klingons were busy fighting with the Kazon, the Caretaker's array would probably be destroyed. Both sides would blame each other. The Klingons would destroy the Kazon ships. Now trapped in the Delta Quadrant, they know about Suspiria. They know there's another one because they talked to the Caretaker. Again, negotiation is a thing. They did try. They didn't get anywhere because Klingons aren't known for their negotiating skills, but then again, neither did Voyager. But they learned there's a female Caretaker out there. So there's a decision to be made. Search for the Caretaker to find a quick way home. Or, what decision do you think they would make? See, at this point, they know about the Bajoran wormhole, and technically the distance to the Bajoran wormhole is less than the distance back to the Klingon Empire. They could make the decision to head for the wormhole. However, I think they would perceive that as too great of a risk. As much as the Bajoran wormhole is said to be stable, by the time they get there, it might not be there anymore. And the Gamma Quadrant is just as much of an unknown variable, and the time isn't much. Now, it should also be pointed out that a Vor'Cha is slower than an Intrepid-class starship, faster than a Nova-class, but all the same, I think they're going to head straight for the Klingon Empire. I don't think they're going to head for the wormhole. Let me know if you think different, but I think they'll head straight for it. Now, Klingons, again, they are willing to negotiate and they are willing to fight. They're going to hold off utilizing the cloaking device too much because it's a power drain, just like Voyager to restrict replicators, things like that. They're going to move in normal space. They're going to have a lot of problems with the Kazon, but the Klingons, I think, they're not going to run from this. They're not going to shy from it. They won't ally with the Kazon, but the Klingons will find ways to undermine them. They will identify the weakness of the Kazon, their division. The same weakness the Trabe put into them by getting the Kazon to fight amongst themselves is still a weakness. My guess would be the Klingons would try to upset the balance of power with the Kazon. They'd probably ally with races possibly like the Trabe. They might work with the Talaxians or some others, definitely not the Vidians, especially considering how quickly, we'll get to the Vidians in a minute, but how much of a problem we're going to have with them. But they will very likely work to undermine the Kazon to remove that problem. They can't fight every Kazon ship constantly, and with the Ogla and the Nistrum and others constantly coming for them, they're probably going to look for a way to undermine the Kazon division and use it against them. So maybe they'll work with the sect to make it stronger than the others, not to make a unified Kazon or bring stability, but probably to increase the fighting. They'll play the sects against each other. They'll use third parties, other allies of the Kazon, to work with them to undermine the Kazon Empire. Or whatever you want to call the Kazon. They're not really an empire, are they? They'll find ways to weaken the Kazon, get them to play them off each other, fight amongst themselves, and they will encourage others to fight against the Kazon. The Klingons may even spend a little more time on this before they manage to get out of the area, not truly knowing how far Kazon territory extends to, and not wanting to pursue them. The conflict probably won't last long. The Kazon will eventually either stabilize, come to a peace amongst themselves, or possibly even one sect would learn to dominate. But it would be long enough to distract the Kazon to allow them the Klingons to get out of the area. As much as Klingons don't run from a fight, which is why I think they would slow down to have this fight, this fight is not their goal. They can't take on the entire Kazon collective. They can't. Strong as the Klingons are, despite the technological disparity, the Kazon ships are large, they're heavily armed, and they have a lot of them. And they're just going to keep coming. No matter how many ships you destroy, those raiders are pretty easy for the Kazon to just build more of. The carriers, yeah, they're a bit more of a large, complicated vessel, but enough of them could overwhelm Voyager. It's going to overwhelm a Klingon cruiser the same. They'll probably utilize their cloak to escape and evade, but they'll use every trick in the book to try and get the Kazon to basically fight themselves. Because let's face it, the Kazon, especially the Mages like color, they're not the brightest. Some of the others, some of the ones that run the Ogla and the Relora, they're a bit smarter. They might not fall for the trick, but it would certainly keep the Kazon off balance, and they would carry on. But at the same time, the Klingons by this point have attracted the ire of the Vidians. The Vidians have identified that Klingon DNA could be used potentially to stabilize and cure the phage. They are just going to keep coming. They're going to be under attack. Every Vidian ship in the quadrant is probably going to be looking for them. So they are going to need allies, but no one's going to help them with the Vidians. So for this one, the Klingons have got one option. Run. They can't negotiate with the Vidians, and the Klingons will not allow themselves to be pawns. They will not be experimented on. Now, it's possible that under those circumstances, the Klingons would actually end up in an armed conflict they couldn't get out of. Vidian technology is comparable to many Alpha Quadrant races. It's possible the Vidians would actually destroy the Klingons, but for the sake of the story, let's assume the Klingons, we're not going to underestimate them. They manage to outrun the Vidians. They get out of their space. They cloak. They just get as far away from them as they can, and they manage to escape. Now, on their journey, the Klingons will use things like cloaking devices to get through swarm space. If they encounter the Cretonan guard like the Equinox did, more than likely the Cretonans are the ones who get the bloody nose. As they journey, the Klingons are just going to cover space as quickly as they can. They're not as interested in petty side quests as Starfleet vessels would be, so more than likely they'll only go, of course, for additional resources. They're also more likely to try and steal those resources as they are negotiate for them or simply try and extract them, effectively becoming pirates as much as anything else. But that said, Klingons are not savage barbarians like we give them credit for. Where possible, they will find a more peaceful solution because they're not dumb enough to know that they can't go around kicking over every anthill and think that they're not going to get stung. They've managed to outrun the Vidians. They've destabilized the Kazon, which has allowed them to get out of the area. Once they're past the Delphic expanse, they're kind of home free on this, but as we know, there are other races out there that are dangerous. And what are they going to do when they encounter these races? Borg. They're going to fight them. They're going to fight the Borg. There's going to be no negotiation, no surrender. They're just going to fight them. They see the Borg and 8472 conflict going on. More than likely, the Klingons will simply turn around and cloak and try and get away from it. They might recognize 8472 for the threat that they are. And it's plausible that perhaps they will try to assist the Borg in defeating them, but not in the same way Voyager did. It would more likely be finding a more brutal solution. Rather than relying on Borg nanotech, they might default to other more Klingon-based weaponry or tactics to basically help the Borg fight. Now, I don't want to say exactly what those would be because I'm not Klingon and I can't put myself exactly in that situation, but I don't think the Klingons would look for the scientific solution like Voyager would or humans would do. I think they'd look for the tactical solution. They'd find a way for the Borg or just do it themselves to detonate some kind of warhead to collapse the anomalies that 8472 were creating. They might even inspire the Borg to change their tactics, but they would want mutually assured destruction. They'd also want the Borg weakening. In fact, the result of a Klingon intervention in this conflict might result in the Borg being catastrophically crippled by 8472 before they were defeated. But assuming the Klingons survive this, they can move on their merry way. Carry on along, but we also know about races like Hirogen. What are they going to do when they encounter a Hirogen? They're going to kill them. They're going to fight them. Of course they are. They're not going to give them holodeck technology and try to find a peaceful solution. They'll recognize, from their point of view, there's no ability to negotiate with a Hirogen, so they will simply move on. Fight them. They might also side, I think, the same way Voyager did against the Malon when they encounter the night aliens, because they would see the Malon as dishonorable and probably remind them of like scummy little Ferengi. So they probably would more than likely turn on them. There is a wild card here as well, which is again the USS Equinox. If they were to encounter the Equinox, assuming it was under the same circumstances as Voyager, my guess would be if they saw the Equinox in the state, they'd initially try to help, but when they realize what the crew of the Equinox are doing by torturing those life forms and killing them, I think the majority of Klingons would be morally outraged. Klingons, again, they're not the savage brutes we think they are. I think they might understand the Starfleet crew, but I think ultimately they would go, well, we're not going to use that. You're on your own. We're leaving you to it. Maybe they'd evacuate the crew to the Klingon ship and leave the Equinox to its fate and be destroyed. But my feeling would be they'd simply just walk away. The allies or not, they'd be like, you have violated your own laws. You have disgraced yourselves, dishonored your houses by murdering innocent aliens that came to you in peace, and you simply killed them. Now, 23rd century Klingons, maybe they'd have gone along with it. I don't think 24th century Klingons, who've become a little bit more enlightened and a little more wise to the galaxy, would do that. I think they'd see it as dishonorable, more like a Romulan tactic than anything befitting a Klingon or a human. So they'd simply wipe their hands of it, keep going, Equinox would be destroyed, and they'd leave it. They might make a footnote in their log to mention to the Federation, we encountered one of your ships and we let them all die because of reasons. And they'd just carry on their merry way. Now, in the case of how Voyager got back, utilizing the Borg transwarp conduits, I don't think the Klingons would. I think they would avoid the Borg much more. They would probably try to steal Borg transwarp technology if they got an opportunity. If they could steal a transwarp coil from a Borg ship, they're going to. Now, they wouldn't benefit from having something like 7 of 9 on board, but they'd give it a good go. If they encountered a Borg probe ship like Voyager did, they might try and steal the technology in order to get home. If they encounter species 116, my guess would be the same. The Klingons are going to try and negotiate or trade technology that would get them home faster, but they may also resort to trying to steal it. So it's possible one of the ways the Klingons would get home would be utilizing these kinds of methods, but I think the Klingons are going to ultimately have to do this in a more systematic way. I think it's going to be a much longer journey for them. They're going to take a lot longer than Voyager. They might have to travel all the way back in real space. Ultimately, I do think the Klingons are going to make it. And there's a reason I think that. Because we did encounter a Klingon vessel in the Delta Quadrant that had got there under its own power. And this was an old Klingon battle cruiser from before the time when the Federation and the Klingons were even allies. But that ship, a much older, slower, less powerful vessel than a Vor'Cha, has managed to do it. Now, they were doing it on purpose, and they probably used tactics like staying cloaked and simply staying out of everybody's way because they were on a holy mission. But a lot of those same methods that crew used could easily be employed by these Klingons and would allow them to make this journey. So underestimating the Klingons is absolutely something we should not do. I think the Klingons are going to make it. They might find a wormhole. They'll look for cheats, shortcuts. They'll look for new technologies, subspace catapults, quantum slipstream drive, coaxial warp, transwarp, anything they can find. They'll make improvements to their technology and to their ship as it is to try and get home a little bit faster. Ultimately, I do think they're going to make it one way or another. There are going to be casualties. I think the casualties will be higher because of their tendency to default to violence, but they are going to make it. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Do the Klingons make it back? Are they destroyed? Do they encounter something that they would use that Voyager was not able to use, like the Barzan wormhole? Let me know in the comment section down below.